Hello everybody, this is Brian David Marshall, and this is Spell, Counterspell. We are going to talk about, with two Pro Tour champions, we have Craig Wescoe and even Floch, and we are going to talk about the merits and downsides of playing either aggro or control in the current standard format. Craig, I'm going to start with you. Make the case for playing an aggro deck in standard right now.
Well, a lot of the decks are playing a lot of tap lands, scry lands. So if you can get in underneath what they're trying to do, if they're just playing tap lands in the early turn and they're trying to stabilize with planeswalkers and things like that, there's about 3 turns where if you get out in front of them, they have to have a card like Anger of the Gods or Drown in Sorrow, or they're just dead. Okay,
and then, so how does that affect how you're going to build an aggro deck? Are you playing a completely different mana base than they are? Are you not able to take advantage of those same lands?
Yeah, you can, especially on turn 1. A lot of decks, you see the blue-white-red Jeskai Tempo deck, where they don't have any 1-drops, but they have Seeker the way Goblin Rabblemaster or Brimaz, and then Mantis Rider. And so you can just take your turn 1 off and still kind of be an aggro deck, or you can just go straight up with like mono black, mono red, and just like start jamming creatures on the board from turn 1 on.
Okay. Even Floch, you've become, in the absence of Guillaume Waffatop at this tournament, you've been canonized to the patron saint of control for this tournament.
I guess that's fair.
So when you hear Craig talking about this, playing these 1-drops and 2-drops, does your mouth water? Are you like, I can't wait to sweep these all off the board? Make the case for a control deck.
Well, this is a new format, and in every format there is a control deck. And there are some powerful cards, you just need to find them and play them. And this format, it's not for sure yet, but Dig is like very powerful card.
Dig Through Time?
Dig Through Time, yes.
Replacing your precious Sphinx's Revelation.
Yes, exactly. And Prognostic Sphinx look like instantly good creature because it serves sort of like game-ending spell that opponents can't get rid of. It's like new Sphinx or Revelation, let's just say. It's not that great, obviously, but in long game it can be new the game. So yeah,
you're replacing card draw with card selection there, where you're sifting through the top.
Exactly. You don't need that many lands now. You just need to good card selection.
But how do you survive against so many good cheap creatures? One single card like a Goblin Rabblemaster presents such a threat to you by itself.
Every time there are good answers, you just need to find them. They are situational, but once the format gets a little bit more stable and known, you can find the right mix of answers, and then you have great control deck.
So you played blue-black control for this tournament?
Yes.
Was there any temptation to go to 3-color, to think about Esper control? And Hostility seems like a card tailor-made for you to play.
Yes, we tried that, and Hostility is obviously a great card, but the rest of white cards didn't seem like it offers enough to spoil your mana base. But maybe it's worth it, we just didn't find the right deck.
Okay. So Craig, what are the premium aggro decks to you right now in this field? As we've gone like a day and a half through this tournament, what would you say the top 3 aggro decks are?
Well, a lot of the mid-range decks, the top mid-range decks, are actually sort of a combination of aggro and mid-range. So the Abzan deck, for instance, some of them curve up all the way to Elspeth, and some of them just stop at Siege Rhino. And they can start as early as Bloodsoaked Champion and Soldier of the Pantheon, or they can just kind of be 2 through 4 mana cost. That's a pretty aggressive deck when you stop at Siege Rhino, And then the other sort of fast mid-range kind of aggro deck is Jeskai Tempo, where it stops at Mantis Rider. Unless you want to count Sarkhan. I guess Sarkhan kind of counts.
We'll count Sarkhan.
So those are kind of the 2 top decks in the format, not just among aggro decks. And then the super aggressive decks with 1-drops and things like that, I think mono black aggro is well positioned against a lot of the green decks, and mono red can really take people by surprise if they're not prepared to just get burnt out.
Okay. I got to ask you, actually, you say mid-range decks. How do you both as an aggressive player and as a control player, deal with the mid-range decks in general? Like, mid-range decks are designed to prey on the aggro decks, aren't they?
I mean, usually, but there's a lot of counter trumps. So there's things like negate and what's the stroke, disdainful stroke?
Yeah.
So the cards like Siege Rhino that all the mid-range decks are trying to play to kind of get back into the game and get out of burn range, well, there's a 2-mana counterspell for that. And then if it's not Siege Rhino, well, maybe it's like a Nissa or an Elspeth. Well, the disdainful stroke stops all those too.
I think we found a card maybe you guys can both agree upon.
Yes, totally. So far I agree.
What about you, Ivan? How are you dealing with, it looks to me, looking at the blue-black control decks this weekend, that they're designed to, drown in sorrow or bile blight to clean up a bunch of little creatures.
Yes.
But how do you start dealing with, like, people who are putting out one big, meaty threat after another, letting you deal with them one for one?
Again, you just need to find the right answers. In my deck, it's Downfall, Hero's Downfall, and Silence the Believers, which are great removals for bigger creatures. Sometimes you can get 2 for 1 with Silence. You also have Dissolve, which is 3-mana counterspell, and the Stroke that Craig mentioned. It's good counterspells for any big threat they can throw at you, including Siege Rhino. And also those decks, they do have some cards that are meant for aggro matchups. They do have Downfall main deck, they do have Bile Blight main deck, and those cards are dead against you, which really helps when you are trying to get control of the game and win with cards like Prognostic Sphinx, for example.
Okay, so now I have to ask you, what do you do in the control mirror? How do you approach, when both players are settling in for a long game, are going to not miss any land drops, and have very similar spells? How do you find an edge there against another control player?
You need to get through your card draw or your threats. You do that with discard, you do that with counter magic, and that's pretty much it. Every time there's a way to attack them.
How much does experience really play into that matchup as opposed to maybe some of the other matchups?
A lot, of course. In our testing, when I played our aggro or mid-range decks, I wasn't playing as good as other players in our team. So yeah, your experience plays a lot. I just have that experience and can think like several turns ahead with control deck, and I can do math right often with aggro and mid-range decks.
Okay, Craig, I asked you the same question. How do you approach an aggro mirror or an aggro on aggro matchup? How do you find an edge against an opponent that's trying to do very similar things to you and has very similar cards to what you're playing?
Well, there's a couple of different strategies you can use. One, if you're one of the red decks, whether you're mono red or Jeskai tempo, you can just assume the role of the control deck, especially if you're on the draw. Like if you win game 1 and they're on the play, you can just start burning all their creatures out. And then eventually, once you get into the mid game, you need to have some sort of way to turn the corner. So one way to do that is Karanos, God of Storms, right? So like if you're using all of your removal spells on their creatures, suddenly you're out of cards, right? And they're out of cards. What's the best card when you're both out of cards? Karanos.
Absolutely.
That's basically my Sphinx's Revelation. And if you're, let's say, the mono black deck, one of your edges is that you have a card like Mogis's Marauder. So if you can get into a position where you're either in a race or your creatures are holding off their creatures, Mogis's Marauder can break through in either of those scenarios. So it can just 12 in one turn. So it kind of forces the other aggro decks to deal with what you're trying to do because they know you have that trump.
Okay. So Ivan was just talking about how he has, not difficulty, but isn't as comfortable playing a mid-range or an aggro deck. Have you ever been in a situation where you've played a control deck in a big tournament, and is that something you feel comfortable with?
I have. I played a control deck at Grand Prix Cincinnati. I went 0-3. So I'm not opposed to playing it. I might not do well with it. But no, seriously though, I did jam a lot of control mirrors for this tournament because I knew that there's a lot of good control cards like End Hostilities, Anger of the Gods, things like that. And Elspeth, one of the best cards in the format, is a lot better in a control deck than it is in like a sort of aggressive deck. So certainly not opposed to it, but I found that Jeskai Tempo was just the deck that was putting up the best numbers in my testing, and it's a pretty aggressive deck, so I wasn't allured by the control decks.
Okay. And so we're going to wrap this up. We'll move over to the news desk and take some questions from people, but I got to ask you, name one, when you're playing an aggro deck, what is the one card you just don't want to see your opponent playing?
Anger of the Gods, for sure.
And I'm going to ask you the same thing. Playing a control deck, what's the one card that you just dread seeing from an aggro player?
Thoughtseize.
What is it?
Thoughtseize. Yeah.
Aggro Thoughtseize.
Yeah, or unanswered Rebel Master.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciated this.
Okay.
This has been Spell or Counterspell. I don't know what you guys chose at home, but please let us know on Twitter, Facebook, etc. Sending it back from the Tournament Center, this is Brian David Marshall.